30 consecutive days of polluted air from wildfires. That's what residents of the Bay Area have been experiencing until today. It's the first day with no spare the air warnings in the Bay Area in that period of time. But we do have more than 17,000 firefighters still battling blazes. That's just in California. In Oregon, the big Beachy Creek fire, which has burned about 200,000 acres, is now about 20% contained. But there's more still to come, hopefully not, but potentially so. Michael Gallner is joining us now. He is a UC Berkeley assistant professor in mechanical engineering. He's done a lot of research on fire management here. And so, Michael, as you look at what has unfolded this year, we, of course, just had the president out there talking about forest management. But how do you solve this problem, or at least make progress on this problem? Because the last few years, I mean, is it sustainable, the pace of wildfires that we've seen?
Well, I don't think the kind of destruction and this, I mean, the huge smoke impacts we've seen, I don't think this is sustainable for public health, for local communities. And unfortunately, the fire community has been talking about this problem for decades. There's the path to managing this and to getting back a lot is fuel management, but it's not really about raking. It's about bringing fire back on the landscape, bringing our landscapes back to the way they were before colonialization. And beyond that, making our communities so that they can't burn. And so we really haven't adapted to fire. California has always had wildland fire. There's always been large fires. With climate change, we're seeing more fire weather events that are just more extreme and larger. And so that heightens our need to go back to sort of the old fire regimes where we didn't have this extreme fuel load. And so we need to find a new collaborative path to working together and managing fire so that our landscapes don't burn in this extreme fashion and our communities are safe for people to live in.
Michael, your area of expertise is actually the wildland urban interface known as WUI. And I understand in San Francisco, a lot of the original inciting incidents were at those complexes, right? They are physical buildings and structures that ended up creating this ripple effect when you look at the wildfires. What's a way to mitigate this? You know, what are some of the solutions that you have been proposing that you're working on with your colleagues here?
Well, in the wildland urban interface, I mean, it's twofold. One, if we manage our landscapes around, we're not going to have as great of a fire exposure. Most of the structures ignite, not from the fire itself. We have a defensible space around structures, but actually by embers, these small burning particles that land and then ignite. And if we can manage the fires to be less intense, we won't have as much exposure. But we need to build the structures and the whole communities so they won't burn down. It's not just unsafe. There were 20 fatalities in these fires in California this year. But beyond that, you know, if your neighbor's home ignites and your home is within 30 or less feet, it's probably going to ignite as well, no matter what your best effort is. And so what we need to do is create a community effort to try to protect those homes. That includes vents, fire-resistant roofs. That includes maintenance around the home in terms of this defensible space, keeping the brush away. There's lots of relatively easy things to do. And one of the hardest parts is that most of our homes are already built. So if you have, let's say, a wood shake roof on a home, which hopefully we don't have much anymore, that's going to ignite. And then those shingles will spew and fly to your neighbors. And so we need to make those changes, and we need to incentivize these financial changes as well when they're really high risk.
Are you able to track this trend of, when you talk about people not building or living in places where fires might be prone, essentially, it seems as if you have a double-edged sword, because people are trying to get out of large cities right now. And that means they would go to less populated areas. I think in your part of the world, California, there was a migration towards Washington State and Oregon. So how do you reverse that? It seems we're doing the exact opposite of what you're recommending we do.
You know, and there's a lot of debate on this topic, right? That we should not be building where there's high fire prone areas and that we should be moving out of them. As an engineer, I don't see it that way. I think that we need to build for the risks that we have in the community. Not everyone's willing to accept the cost and the price of what you have to do that safely. But I believe that we can build safely and be in sort of, you know, a cohesive environment where we know that there's fire. But what that means is that we're going to have to manage the land and build our structures so that they don't burn. And, you know, that means better regulations, better working with the fire community, and just an overall recognition that fire is normal in these areas. This isn't this one-off event. Paradise, California, which burned down, had its evacuations again this year. It was evacuated. A fire came very close to that community. And so unfortunately, this is going to be continually happening. And so we need to go beyond just the home and think of that whole community and the surrounding landscape, and think about green belts, and think about protecting the homes and neighbors helping neighbors and continued maintenance. A lot of these programs have been funded and then taken away, and then taken away. This is not something that works like that. If we're looking at hurricane or anything else, you have to keep those maintenance things going so that you're going to be safe, because unfortunately, these summer fires, this isn't even peak fire season. October to November is when the winds pick up typically.
So, Michael, you started this conversation by saying that people in fire management have been having this discussion for decades. And then you just mentioned that the funding is kind of, this herky-jerky kind of effect here. So is there more willingness to adapt some of these sustainable solutions that you're talking about? Where are we in California and on the West Coast generally?
Well, unfortunately, every 2 years we have a new disaster of unprecedented scale, and this year is no exception. I believe that recognition is coming. It's been painful to accept. Good signs this year. Vicki Christensen, the chief of the U.S. Forest Service, and Governor Newsom signed an agreement that they'll be burning or managing about 1 million acres and treating that, which means reducing the fuel loads every year. That's a great cooperation between the Forest Service and California, and will take good strides. They're trying to change some of the legal rules and some of the issues in terms of environmental laws for doing prescribed burnings. Sometimes by the time those things are approved, it's years later and the funding is gone. And it is really hard to get that done. And so we don't want to remove all reviews of that process, but we need to streamline it dramatically. So I think there's some good signs, but in general, I think the legislation hasn't put the teeth. It hasn't really forced people to make a lot of changes. It hasn't put the financial incentive there. That's very hard in this new fiscal environment. But I think it's going to be critical that we do that. And one way may be that the state and other government entities can work more with insurance and work more cohesively. Right now, most homeowners are losing insurance in wildfire risk areas. It'd be much better to push them towards trying to keep the whole community safe. And if those communities are deemed to be safe and a much lower risk, pricing it appropriately. That's a good push to get people to make changes.
Yeah, that's a very interesting concept, and we'll be sure to ask our next insurance guests about that, Michael. Thank you so much. Michael Gullner is a Cal Berkeley assistant professor in mechanical engineering. Please enjoy your day of fresh air. I hope it lasts, Michael, beyond just today. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Julie.
We'll be right back.